So the next thing that we're going to do is set up Git on our machine. And I'll be using the straight out of the box terminal application on my Mac. For those of you who are Windows users, Git for Windows is strongly recommended. First, let's check to see if we have Git installed. And to do that, I type git -- version and hit return. And it shows that I have version 2.4.3, and anything above 2 is great. And then we'll see who it's configured to. And I will ask git config user.name. And it is configured to me, Mozzarella. And we'll ask it whose email address is associated with this particular Git account. And git config user.email. And we'll see that it's associated with my GitHub address, my GitHub email address. So if you haven't installed Git yet, you can configure Git to recognize you. And you can set this with the commands git config user.name and in quotes, put your username, and git config -- global user.email. And mine is mozzarella@github.com. And so we've checked what version of Git we have. If you haven't configured Git, you now have done it. So let's move to repositories. You may have heard this term before. It's often shortened to repo. And I have a scroll here because a repository holds the entire history of your project. It is the unit of separation between projects in Git. Each of your projects, libraries, or discrete pieces of software should have its own repository. For teachers, I recommend using one repository per assignment or unit. So in our terminal, I'm going to create a repository by using the command git init, and then we'll cd or change directory into exercise 1. Git init exercise 1. So it says that we have initialized an empty repository in this exact place on my desktop. And then we'll change directory into it, cd exercise 1. And it's important to know that no network activity happened. Just now, we made that output when we created a Git repository, but there's been no network activity. And now I'm going to ask our terminal to list the files in exercise 1 with the commands ls space -al. And so you can see what's inside a repository when we start. When I use the ls -al command, I can see the hidden files in here. And there's this one file, .git, right here, which has a dot in front of it because we're in a Unix system and that's a hidden folder. And the reason I point this out is to further drive home the point that Git does not use the network unless you tell it to. Almost everything we do in the command line with Git is actually just working on the file system. So now that you have a repository, it is time to talk about the mental model for how Git works. And Git is like a desk. There are 3 areas that you should think about. The working directory is like a notebook on your desk or a typewriter. It's where you're making all of your initial thoughts, maybe a few design ideas, just jotting down fragments. You have all of your stuff spread out. You're doing all kinds of work. You're moving things around. Your staging area over here on the right, these manila envelopes, this is where you put your rough draft. And that's a manila folder that's still on your desk. You're putting things into that and taking them out as you get ready. And it's kind of like a rough draft of a final archive. Your repository is your final draft. And here that's the filing cabinet on the lower right. When you're finished with your rough draft, you open up that filing cabinet and put the manila folder in. But let's put it another way. On the bottom here, you have your working area, which is the most familiar thing to you. This is just a folder on your computer. So your text editor, your build tools, your testing suite, everything that you have already that you're using as a developer without version control accesses files on your computer in your working directory. At the top, you have a repository, and this is where all the snapshots of your project live. Everything in the entire history of your project is in the repository. Technically, how this is implemented is that .git folder contains everything in your repository in plain files. They're compressed, and they're organized in a certain way, but at the base level, it's stored in plain files. And then in the middle, the yellow area, you have this thing called the staging area. And this is something that trips people up, so I like to spend extra time on this. And when you're teaching students about how to use Git, this is something that they don't immediately get the need or the reasoning behind it. So the staging area's job is to bridge the gap between all the snapshots in my entire project history in the blue and this special folder where I do all the work on my computer that's green. So if you use the staging area as a rough draft as it's intended, building towards a meaningful commit, you'll get in way less trouble. And we do that with the commands git add to add our changes to the rough draft and git commit to take the snapshot and seal it into our filing cabinet. One piece of this metaphor that is not completely obvious is that once something goes into the repository and into that filing cabinet, we never change it and we never move it around. It's a one-way action. So with these things in mind, the working area and the staging area and repository, you'll get an idea of how the system actually works. And now we're going to use it by creating a README and asking Git what the status is.